You have a beautiful heart, you feel deeply, you notice the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses between words, the stories behind someone's silence. You are the one who understands without being told. And because you understand so well, you often overextend. You explain away their inconsistency, you justify their distance, you tell yourself they're just overwhelmed or they've been hurt before. And so you give more, you love harder, you try to prove that your patience can heal what their effort will not. But there comes a moment, a sacred threshold, when empathy stops being love and starts being self-abandonment. That threshold is where your power begins. The super empath's greatest struggle is not loving too much. It's loving without boundaries. It's believing that if you just communicate better, show more compassion, offer more reassurance, eventually they will rise to meet you. But attraction and respect are not born from endless availability. They are born from value, and value is never loud, desperate, or pleading. Value is steady. It is certain. It is anchored. Silence, in its highest form, is not punishment. It is alignment. When you reach your threshold, silence becomes your declaration. I will no longer negotiate my worth. It is not about withdrawing love. It is about withdrawing access to the version of you that tolerates less than you deserve. Notice something powerful. When you stop over-explaining, stop over-giving, stop over-pursuing, something shifts. The dynamic recalibrates. Because in the absence of your constant effort, the truth is revealed. If they value you, they lean in. If they were coasting on your emotional labor, they drift away. Either way, you gain clarity. And clarity is freedom. You see, when you chase answers, you lower your leverage. When you embody standards, you elevate it. Silence creates space, and in that space, people show you who they are without your interference. There is a divine principle at work here. What is meant for you does not require you to exhaust yourself to keep it. Real connection thrives in mutual effort. If you are always the one initiating, soothing, fixing, checking in, and keeping the relationship alive, you are not in partnership, you are in performance. Your silence is not a game. It is a boundary. It says, I trust myself enough to step back. It says, I am willing to lose what is not aligned rather than lose myself trying to keep it. This is where many empaths struggle, because silence feels uncomfortable. It feels like abandonment. It triggers the fear that if you stop trying, everything will collapse. But if it collapses when you stop carrying it, it was never stable to begin with. Love is not sustained by one person's effort. When you cross your threshold and choose silence, you are not becoming cold. You are becoming wise. You are allowing consequences to do the teaching you no longer need to explain. You are letting absence reveal value. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to convince someone of your worth is often the moment they feel it most. Why? Because certainty is magnetic. When you are centered, when you are calm, when you are not scrambling for reassurance, you communicate something powerful without words. I know who I am. And nothing is more attractive than someone who knows their value and refuses to bargain with it. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. You release the need to orchestrate the outcome. You release the urge to fix their confusion. You release the responsibility for their growth. And in doing so, you reclaim your energy. You redirect it toward your purpose, your joy, your expansion. That is the super empath's transformation. Instead of pouring into someone who offers you uncertainty, you pour into your mission. Instead of obsessing over their mixed signals, you refine your standards. Instead of seeking validation, you become the source of it. And suddenly, your silence is not empty. It is powerful. It is grounded. It is unshakable. Understand this. The right person will never require you to mute your intuition. They will not thrive on your anxiety. They will not grow through your exhaustion. They will meet your energy with effort. They will value your presence because they can feel its rarity. But you must first value it yourself. When silence becomes your greatest relationship power, you no longer chase closure. You create it. You no longer beg for clarity. You observe behavior. You no longer fear losing someone. You fear losing alignment. And that shift changes everything. Because the super empath who learns to stand at their threshold and say, no more, becomes unstoppable. Not hardened, not bitter, but elevated. Your heart remains open. But your standards rise. You still love deeply, but you no longer love blindly. And in that balance between compassion and conviction, you step into your highest relational power. Silence is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-respect. And when you master that, you don't just transform your relationships, you transform yourself. Empathy is your gift. It allows you to read between the lines, to sense what someone is feeling before they even articulate it, to respond with care instead of reaction. In its healthiest form, empathy creates emotional safety. It says, I see you, I hear you, I am with you. It builds bridges instead of walls. It strengthens intimacy because it makes the other person feel understood. But there is a subtle line, and it's a dangerous one, between empathy and overfunctioning. Overfunctioning begins when empathy turns into responsibility. Instead of understanding someone's emotions, you start managing them. Instead of supporting their growth, you start compensating for their lack of effort. You move from being a partner to being a regulator of the entire relationship dynamic. It often happens quietly. You notice they're stressed, so you initiate more. You sense they're pulling away, so you lean in further. You feel their insecurity, so you reassure them again and again. You tell yourself you're just being loving, patient, supportive, and you are, but at a cost. Because empathy listens, overfunctioning labors. Empathy allows space for two people to show up. Overfunctioning fills every gap, so the other person doesn't have to. And when you constantly fill the gaps, you rob the relationship of balance. You become the engine, the emotional anchor, the problem solver. You carry the weight that was meant to be shared. The irony is that overfunctioning often feels noble. It feels like strength. It feels like maturity. You pride yourself on being the understanding one. You convince yourself that relationships require sacrifice. And they do, but not self-erasure. When you overfunction, you start anticipating needs before they are expressed. You fix problems before they are acknowledged. You smooth over tension before it can teach anything. And slowly, the other person becomes passive, not necessarily because they are malicious, but because human nature adapts to the level of responsibility required. If you always step in, they step back. If you always initiate, they wait. If you always repair, they avoid. This is where resentment is born, not because you gave, but because you gave beyond what was reciprocated. You gave in hopes that your effort would inspire theirs. But attraction and respect are not fueled by one person's overperformance. They are fueled by mutual investment. True empathy does not mean tolerating inconsistency. It does not mean explaining away red flags. It does not mean staying silent about your needs because you understand theirs. Healthy empathy includes yourself in the equation. It says, I care about what you're feeling, and I also care about what I'm feeling. Overfunctioning excludes you. You begin to justify behavior that doesn't align with your standards. You minimize your disappointment because you understand their past. You silence your frustration because you don't want to pressure them. You shrink your expectations so the relationship feels easier to maintain. But love was never meant to feel like maintenance alone. When you operate from pure empathy, you can witness someone's struggle without absorbing it as your assignment. You can support without saving. You can listen without losing yourself. There is calmness in it. There is equality in it. When you operate from overfunctioning, there is anxiety. There is urgency. There is the subtle fear that if you stop trying so hard, everything will fall apart. And that fear is the clearest sign you've crossed the line. The super empath must learn this distinction. Compassion does not require compensation. Understanding someone's wounds does not obligate you to endure their unhealed behavior. You can acknowledge their pain without volunteering to carry it. A balanced relationship thrives when both people feel responsible for its growth. When only one person is doing the emotional heavy lifting, intimacy slowly turns into imbalance. And imbalance eventually erodes attraction, respect, and trust. Rate empathy is powerful. It is sacred, but it must be guided by boundaries. Because when empathy is paired with self-respect, it creates connection. When empathy is paired with fear of losing someone, it creates overfunctioning. And the moment you stop overfunctioning is the moment you invite the other person to rise, or reveal that they never intended to. There is a moment in every super empath's journey when something shifts internally. It's subtle at first, a quiet exhaustion, a heaviness that doesn't come from loving, but from overextending. You still care, you still want the connection. But something inside you whispers, "This is costing me more than it should." That whisper is your emotional threshold. At the beginning of a relationship, giving feels natural. You check in often. You offer reassurance. You adapt to their schedule. You make room for their moods. You tell yourself that flexibility is love, that patience is virtue. And in healthy measure it is. Relationships require generosity of spirit, but self-abandonment disguises itself as generosity. The emotional threshold is crossed when you start betraying your own needs to preserve harmony. It's when you say it's fine but feel disappointed. When you accept crumbs because you're afraid of asking for the whole loaf. When you lower your standards to avoid being labeled too much. You begin to rationalize. They're just busy. They have been hurt before. I don't want to pressure them. And while compassion is beautiful, it becomes dangerous when it consistently overrides your intuition. Your body always knows before your mind admits it. You feel anxious waiting for replies. You replay conversations in your head. You question whether you're asking for too much, even though what you're asking for is basic consistency. You sense imbalance, but instead of addressing it, you compensate for it. That compensation is the signal. The threshold isn't crossed in one dramatic moment. It's crossed in small concessions. Each time you silence your truth, each time you initiate when you're tired of initiating, each time you accept less effort than you give, individually, these moments seem harmless. Collectively, they erode your self-trust. And once self-trust begins to erode, resentment quietly replaces romance. You might not express it immediately. Super empaths are skilled at enduring. But internally, you start keeping score. You feel unseen, unchosen, under-prioritized. Yet you continue showing up, hoping your loyalty will inspire theirs. Here's the hard truth. Love given at the expense of yourself is not sustainable. It may feel noble, but it breeds imbalance. And imbalance always reveals itself eventually. Recognizing your emotional threshold requires radical honesty. It requires asking yourself uncomfortable questions. Am I giving freely, or am I giving to secure their affection? Am I patient, or am I afraid to set boundaries? Am I understanding, or am I excusing behavior that doesn't align with my values? The threshold is not about becoming cold. It's about noticing when your efforts are driven by fear rather than choice. When you give from fullness, there is peace. When you give from fear of losing them, there is anxiety. That anxiety is your alarm system. Many super empaths ignore this alarm because they believe love requires sacrifice. And yes, love requires compromise, but compromise is mutual. Self-abandonment is one-sided. When you are the only one, adjusting, accommodating, and stretching, you are not compromising. You are shrinking. The emotional threshold is the point where shrinking becomes unbearable. It's when you realize you are bending so far to maintain connection that you no longer feel secure within it. It's when you notice you're more focused, on keeping them comfortable than honoring your own discomfort. It's when the relationship feels like a test you're trying to pass rather than a partnership you're co-creating. This realization is not a failure. It is awakening. Crossing that threshold doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you start including yourself in the love. It means your needs are no longer negotiable add-ons, but essential components. It means you understand that mutual effort is not a luxury. It is the foundation. When you recognize your threshold, you reclaim authority over your emotional energy. You stop pouring endlessly into a cup that isn't being refilled. You stop mistaking endurance for devotion. You start valuing reciprocity as much as compassion. And that is where real power begins, not in how much you can tolerate, but in how clearly you can say, "This is where I stand. Silence has been misunderstood for far too long, especially by those who feel deeply. If you are someone who values communication, emotional expression, and clarity, silence can feel like surrender. It can feel passive. It can feel like losing control of the outcome. So your instinct is to speak, to explain, to clarify, to smooth things over before distance grows. But there is a form of silence that is not passive at all. It is deliberate. It is grounded. It is strong. When you reach the point where you've expressed your needs clearly, where you've shown up with honesty and consistency, and yet you're met with confusion, inconsistency, or avoidance, the most powerful move is often not another conversation, it is restraint. Restraint is strength. The super empath often believes that more communication will fix everything. If they just articulate it better, softer, clearer, more compassionately, surely the other person will understand and respond. But communication only works when both people are willing participants. If someone is unwilling to meet you in clarity, your repeated explanations do not create intimacy. They create imbalance. Silence in this context is not about shutting down. It is about stepping back. It is saying internally, I have said what needs to be said. Now I will observe. Instead of chasing reassurance, you watch behavior. Instead of persuading someone to see your value, you allow them to demonstrate whether they already do. There is immense confidence in that posture. Weakness begs. Strength waits. When you stop reacting to every delayed text, every shift in tone, every moment of emotional distance, something profound happens. You remove the reward for inconsistency. You stop reinforcing the dynamic where they pull back and you lean forward. Instead, you create space, and space reveals truth. If they care, they will feel the shift. They will notice your absence where your effort once lived. They will lean in. If they don't, they will drift. Either outcome provides clarity, and clarity is always more powerful than confusion. Silence also regulates your own nervous system. When you resist the urge to immediately respond out of anxiety, you interrupt the cycle of overfunctioning. You give yourself time to think rather than react. You choose composure over compulsion. That composure communicates something unspoken, but undeniable. I am not desperate for this to work. I am discerning about whether it should, and discernment is magnetic. People often assume that power in relationships comes from grand gestures, passionate speeches, or emotional intensity. But real power often looks quiet. It looks like someone who knows their worth so deeply that they do not need to announce it repeatedly. Silence says, I will not argue for my value. Silence says, if you cannot meet me here, I will not chase you there. It is controlled energy. Doesn't mean you avoid healthy dialogue. It means you stop over-explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. It means you stop trying to convince someone to prioritize you. You allow your absence to do the talking your words no longer need to. For the super empath, this can feel terrifying at first, because silence means relinquishing control. It means you cannot micromanage the connection. It means you must tolerate uncertainty. But within that uncertainty lies dignity. When you speak from fear, your energy contracts. When you remain silent from strength, your energy expands. There is a difference between silent treatment and empowered silence. Silent treatment is manipulation designed to punish. Empowered silence is alignment designed to protect your peace. One is reactive, the other is intentional, and intentional silence changes the dynamic. It forces the other person to confront the space you once filled. It gives them the opportunity to rise into responsibility without your prompting. It also gives you the opportunity to see whether they ever intended to. When silence becomes calibrated strength, you no longer feel the need to prove your devotion through constant availability. You understand that your presence is valuable precisely because it is not automatic. You become steady instead of frantic, observant instead of over-involved, grounded instead of grasping. And in that grounded state, your silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. Detachment is often misunderstood, especially by those who love deeply. It can sound like indifference, like withdrawal, like a lack of care. But true detachment is not about ceasing to feel. It is about ceasing to cling. It is the decision to stop gripping so tightly to an outcome that you lose your balance in the process. For the super empath, attachment forms quickly because connection is felt intensely. You don't just like someone, you feel their potential. You see who they could be. You sense what the relationship might become. And that vision can create a powerful emotional investment long before the foundation is solid. Detachment begins when you separate potential from reality. Instead of loving who they might become, you observe who they consistently are. Instead of holding on to promises, you watch patterns. Instead of trying to steer the relationship toward your hopeful future, you allow it to unfold at its natural pace. This shift is powerful because it removes illusion. When you are overly attached, you interpret mixed signals optimistically. You explain away inconsistencies. You cling to the moments of warmth and overlook the stretches of distance. Your desire for connection filters your perception. But when you detach, you see clearly your perception is not about building walls. It is about standing still. It is saying, I will not force this. I will not chase this. I will not persuade you to choose me. You remain open, but you release the urgency. That absence of urgency changes everything. When someone senses that you are not trying to control the outcome, their true intentions surface. If they value you, they step forward voluntarily. If they were comfortable letting you carry the dynamic, they begin to drift when you stop compensating. Detachment exposes motivation. It reveals whether their effort was genuine or reactive. It shows whether they were invested in you or merely responding to your investment in them. And there is no greater clarity than watching what someone does when you stop doing the work for both of you. For the super empath, this is both liberating and confronting, because part of you may fear that if you stop trying, everything will disappear. But if it disappears when you detach, that information is priceless. It means you were sustaining something that could not sustain itself. Detachment also restores your emotional equilibrium. When you are attached to a specific outcome, every text feels loaded. Every delay feels threatening. Every plan feels like a test. Your mood fluctuates with their behavior. Your peace becomes dependent on their consistency, but when you detach, you reclaim internal stability. You still care, you still hope, but you are no longer tethered to every fluctuation. You understand that your worth is not measured by their attention. You allow space for them to act freely. And in doing so, you free yourself from constant anxiety. There is a divine principle at play here. What is aligned with you will not require relentless pursuit. It will require participation, yes, but not pressure. When something is meant to grow, it responds to mutual effort. It does not depend on one person's emotional labor. Detachment honors this principle. It says, I trust that what is right for me will move toward me without coercion. And that trust is powerful. It transforms you from someone trying to secure love into someone evaluating alignment. Instead of asking, how do I make this work? You begin asking, does this work for me? That shift repositions you in your power. Detachment also invites maturity into the dynamic. When you stop chasing reassurance, you require the other person to initiate. When you stop over-explaining, you allow them to seek understanding. When you stop filling every silence, you give them space to step up. If they do, the connection strengthens naturally. If they don't, you gain clarity without drama. Detachment is not coldness. It is composure. It is the quiet confidence that you will be okay, regardless of the outcome. It is loving without gripping, caring without clinging, hoping without forcing. And in that posture, the truth of any relationship becomes undeniable. Boundaries are often mistaken for barriers, especially by those who are naturally warm, generous, and emotionally attuned. You might fear that if you set limits, you will appear difficult. If you say no, you will seem unkind. If you require consistency, you will be labeled demanding. So instead, you keep the peace, you stretch, you accommodate, you adjust your expectations in the name of harmony. But here is the paradox. The very thing you fear will push someone away is the thing that creates attraction and respect. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not ultimatums, they are standards in action. When you have no boundaries, you unintentionally communicate that access to you is unconditional. Your time, your energy, your emotional labor, all available, regardless of how someone shows up. And while this may feel loving, it quietly diminishes perceived value. Not because you are less valuable, but because value unprotected becomes assumed. People respect what they feel they could lose. When you establish boundaries, you are not threatening loss. You are acknowledging worth. You are saying, this is how I expect to be treated. This is what I am available for. This is what I am not. There is calmness in that clarity. Here is strength in that self-definition. The super empath often waits until they are deeply frustrated before expressing a boundary. They tolerate small disappointments, overlook subtle inconsistencies, and swallow minor resentments until those small moments accumulate into emotional overload. Then the boundary comes out charged with emotion. But the most powerful boundaries are set early and delivered peacefully. They are not reactive, they are proactive. They are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They are about defining your own participation. For example, instead of demanding constant communication, you might simply decide that inconsistency is not something you will invest in. Instead of pleading for effort, you match energy. Instead of arguing about priorities, you observe them. Boundaries elevate attraction because they create polarity between self-respect and uncertainty. When someone senses that you value yourself, they instinctively rise to meet that standard if they are capable. If they are not capable, they retreat. Either outcome serves you. Without boundaries, relationships drift into imbalance. One person gives more, one person invests more, one person adapts more, and that imbalance slowly erodes admiration. Not because you gave too much love, but because love without limits can begin to feel predictable, guaranteed, unchallenged. Mystery and magnetism are not about playing games. They are about self-contained. When you are self-contained, you do not overshare to secure closeness. You do not overextend to earn affection. You allow the relationship to build at a pace that honors mutual effort. You give access in proportion to investment. And that pacing builds anticipation, appreciation, and respect. Boundaries also protect your emotional energy. When you say yes to everything, you dilute your presence. When you reserve your energy for what aligns with your values, your presence becomes intentional. It becomes chosen, not automatic. That intentionality is attractive. It communicates that your life is full, your time is valuable, and your affection is earned through consistency, not extracted through convenience. You stop auditioning for someone's commitment and start evaluating whether they qualify for your devotion. And here's the deeper truth. Boundaries are an act of self-love, not self-defense. They are not there because you expect betrayal. They are there because you expect respect. You are not bracing for disappointment. You are simply unwilling to participate in it. When you hold a boundary calmly, without apology and without aggression, you model emotional maturity. You show that you can care deeply while still honoring yourself. That combination, warmth with firmness, creates safety. It signals that you are not chaotic, not desperate, not easily swayed. You are steady. The right person does not feel threatened by your boundaries. They feel relieved because boundaries remove guesswork. They clarify expectations. They create a structure within which intimacy can grow securely. When you stop bending to maintain connection and start standing in your standards, something remarkable happens. You attract people who are capable of meeting them, and you naturally filter out those who are not. Respect follows clarity. Attraction follows self-assurance. And boundaries are the bridge between empathy and power. There is a subtle but profound shift that occurs when a super empath stops chasing clarity and begins embodying value. At first, it may feel counterintuitive. After all, you are wired to understand, to explain, to soothe, to resolve. You believe that the more effort you put into making someone see your perspective, the more likely they are to meet you halfway. You chase clarity because it feels like security. If they explain themselves, if they justify their actions, if they acknowledge your feelings, you feel seen, validated, and safe. But chasing clarity has a hidden cost. It places your sense of stability in someone else's hands. It ties your peace, your confidence, and your perception of self-worth to their willingness to communicate, explain, or commit. The more you chase, the more you lose. You become reactive, anxious, and overly invested in outcomes that are not fully within your control. You try to negotiate behavior instead of observing reality. Embodying value, on the other hand, is a complete paradigm shift. It says, I do not need to convince anyone of my worth. I am inherently valuable because I am aligned with my purpose, my integrity, and my truth. When you operate from this space, you stop over-explaining and over-apologizing. You stop bending over backward to gain reassurance or validation. You understand that your energy, attention, and presence are gifts, not entitlements, and that they are to be extended wisely, not indiscriminately. Value is magnetic because it is rare, intentional, and authentic. People are drawn to someone who is not constantly seeking affirmation because that person radiates confidence and self-respect. You no longer expend your energy attempting to manage someone else's perception of you. Instead, you focus on being consistent with your own standards. You do not compromise your principles to gain temporary comfort. You do not justify or rationalize behavior that contradicts your boundaries. You become grounded in your own authority over your emotional life. The beauty of embodying value is that it automatically recalibrates relationships. When you no longer chase clarity, you force the dynamic to reveal its truth. People either step up, meeting your energy with equal effort, or they step back, exposing the gap between their words and actions. This is not punishment. It is a natural consequence of integrity and alignment. By refusing to chase, you allow others to demonstrate their intentions through behavior rather than promises. The truth surfaces without you having to plead, explain, or persuade. Chasing clarity often comes from fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being abandoned. Embodying value comes from presence, the confidence that your worth is not determined by their consistency, that your peace is not hostage to their choices. This shift reduces anxiety and emotional labor because you no longer bear the responsibility of securing validation or repairing gaps that are not yours to fix. In practical terms, embodying value means prioritizing your own energy and emotional resources. It means responding instead of reacting. It means observing patterns rather than assuming explanations. It means holding space for others without sacrificing your stability to accommodate their inconsistency. It allows you to participate in relationships as an equal, not as the perpetual caretaker or the over-functioner. Spiritually and emotionally, this practice aligns with the principle that true connection arises from mutual contribution, not unilateral effort. When you embody value, you honor yourself. And in doing so, you teach others how to honor you as well. You stop negotiating for love and start recognizing when it is naturally reciprocated. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop reacting to uncertainty and start responding with discernment. The shift from chasing clarity to embodying value is transformative. It transforms your relationships, your energy, and your sense of self. It replaces anxiety with presence, desperation with dignity, and compromise with alignment. In this space, you are not only more attractive to those who respect and value you, but you are also more at peace with yourself. Your interactions become intentional, your decisions become grounded, and your relationships begin to reflect the true measure of your worth. Not in words, but in consistent, aligned action. When a super empath embraces this principle, they step into a power that is quiet yet undeniable. They no longer need to clarify, explain, or negotiate for connection. Instead, they radiate value, and in that radiance, the right people, the right energy, and the right relationships naturally gravitate toward them. Trusting divine timing and honoring your self-worth is one of the most challenging yet liberating lessons for a super empath. You are wired to feel deeply, to anticipate outcomes, and to try to orchestrate the flow of connection. You want resolution, you want understanding, and you want the puzzle to make sense. When someone pulls away or behaves inconsistently, your instinct is to intervene, to persuade, to create closure through your own effort. But this impulse, while well-intentioned, often bypasses a higher truth. Some things cannot be forced, some lessons cannot be hurried, and some people cannot be made to arrive before they are ready. Divine timing is a principle that reminds you that life unfolds according to rhythms beyond your control. It suggests that the universe, or life itself, is not chaotic but aligned in a way that ensures growth, clarity, and balance for those willing to wait. For a super empath, this means understanding that your role is not to chase, fix, or manipulate outcomes, but to align yourself with your own growth and integrity while observing the natural unfolding of relationships. Every pause, every delay, every moment of uncertainty is not a failure or a reflection of your inadequacy. It is an invitation to trust the process. Trust in divine timing requires patience, which is both practical and spiritual. Practically, it means refraining from over-communicating, over-explaining, or overextending yourself to create clarity where it may not yet exist. Spiritually, it is an acknowledgement that every delay, every challenge, and every act of perceived avoidance carries a lesson about self-worth, boundaries, and the energy you allow into your life. By stepping back and observing, you allow the natural consequences of behavior to reveal truth without your interference. In this sense, divine timing is also a teacher. It shows you who is aligned with your energy, who is willing to meet you on your terms, and who cannot. Many super empaths struggle with the temptation to compromise their values or tolerate disrespect in order to maintain a relationship. They believe that consistency, validation, or affection must be earned through sacrifice. But divine timing reminds you that self-worth is not contingent on someone else's behavior. It is inherent, it is cultivated by honoring your boundaries, protecting your energy, and refusing to accept less than what you deserve. When you understand this, waiting becomes an act of strength rather than a sign of weakness. Patience combined with self-worth transforms the relationship dynamic. You stop chasing explanations or justifications. You stop negotiating for acknowledgement or validation. You understand that the right people will align naturally when they are ready, and the wrong people will reveal themselves through absence, inconsistency, or avoidance. This is not about passivity. It is about intentional observation and disciplined restraint. Your energy is protected, your peace is preserved, and your presence becomes measured, purposeful, and magnetic. Divine timing also teaches resilience. You learn to withstand uncertainty without panic, to accept what cannot be changed, and to release the illusion that your effort alone can dictate outcomes. Every moment of waiting is a moment of growth. Every act of restraint builds confidence. Every decision to honor your worth reinforces the principle that love, respect, and alignment are never forced. They are earned through reciprocity and shared commitment. The super empath who embodies this principle begins to experience freedom from the need to explain, to justify, to manipulate, or to chase. Freedom from anxiety about delayed responses or inconsistent behavior. Freedom from the emotional labor of trying to control outcomes that are not theirs to control. In trusting divine timing and honoring self-worth, they cultivate a presence that is serene, unwavering, and deeply attractive. Ultimately, this principle reshapes not only your relationships, but also your relationship with yourself. It teaches you that waiting does not diminish your value, that absence can reveal truth, and that the alignment you seek externally must first be cultivated internally. It is a lesson in patience, discernment, and integrity. And when you embrace it fully, you step into a form of power that is both subtle and profound, a power that cannot be manipulated, exhausted, or undermined, because it rests in the certainty of your own worth and the rhythm of life's timing. Thank you for your time and trust. Your presence has made this conversation meaningful. Wishing you clarity, strength, and peace on your journey. Goodbye for now.